folks. This is the episode that I am most excited about. It is now 1890, and we are going to learn what happens in this very monumental year of 1890, where Berlin turns into Brunswick. So I'm not going to talk much here now because it's a pretty lengthy episode, but I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you back here in just a little bit. There are a few precursor items we should discuss before we dive right into 1890. In the 1870s, a man by the name of William L. Gross joins his uncle, Langham Boulter, and created Boulter and Gross's General Store. Boulter had a general merchandising store in Berlin and was the postmaster. Gross was an enterprising young man. He arrived in Berlin right at the pinnacle of growth. And I've always speculated what Boulter knew about the B&O's plans through his role as postmaster. In 1889, the effects of the Johnstown flood were felt at Berlin. Here's an article from the Frederick News of that day. A special correspondent sends the following interesting details. One of the greatest floods that has ever known, so say our oldest citizens, was upon us all night of May 31st. The Potomac was rising at a rapid rate, about 2 feet to the hour, until daylight, when the water came sweeping into town and took all the small buildings as it rose: stables, warehouses, hog pens, chicken coops, sheds, trenches, and in fact, everything was more or less damaged until nearly the whole town looked like a mass of ruins, which only a day ago was a peaceful little town. On Friday night, all the families in the lower sections commenced moving their valuables to upper stories and some of the highlands of the town. But even this, in some cases, were not sufficient. Mr. William L. Gross, who keeps a general store, had moved his stock of goods upstairs, and then it was not safe. In a short time, the water was seen to be coming over the floor in many places. Then they had to move all the goods a second time to the Ridman's Hall across the railroad. All our friends from the higher lands came and loaned a helping hand to do all of their power to assist in time of need. Our young men, too, did all in their power. Among the foremost of them were George Hogan, David Taylor, and Thomas Hogan. These showed manly hearts in their endeavors to save goods for those in distress, and in some instances, almost risking their own lives. They worked in the store of William L. Gross until the water was almost to the ceiling, and boated away several skiff loads of goods to higher grounds until all was safe. Jordan, Crampton and Company did not succeed in saving any of their store goods, and all were either damaged or lost entirely. G.S. Winter lost everything. To add to the scene of horror, about the time the waters were playing havoc with things, one of our respected citizens, Mr. Frederick Schaefer, came nearer to losing his life from a stone thrown by a man. The man was knocked senseless and laid so for 3 or 4 hours. It is feared his skull was fractured and his wounds may prove serious, but at last report he was improving slowly. Then, to add to greater distress to those already flooded, fire broke out in Mr. Gross's store 3 times, and 3 times did the brave men of Mr. G.S. Winter, J.E. Thomas, C.E. Sigafoose, J.E. Swope, George Watt, B.F. Sigafoose, Lawson House, L. McKinley, and W.L. Gross repulsed in the rapidly increasing flames. Nothing was destroyed by the fire, which originated in some lime cars that were standing trackside close by. The principal losses from the flood were Jordan, Crampton and Company lost to grain, hay, mill feed, and warehouses from $3,000 to $5,000. F.J. Mertzer's and Sons' whole lumber yard was swept away, containing about 50,000 feet of sawed sycamore and other valuable timber. The only thing that was saved was the engine and west mill frame belonging to B.J. West and Son of Oakland, Maryland. Sam Winter also sustained heavy losses in the way of corn and damage to private property amounting to $1,500. G.S. Winter and Company $2,500, and William L. Gross $1,000 to $2,000. The blacksmith shop of Jordan, Crampton and Company was entirely swept away. Fortunately, no lives or dwelling houses were lost. It was something remarkable how some houses stood the tremendous pressure from the waters around them. S.V. Blessing was also a considerable loser, principally of spirituous liquors, to the extent of $200. Some people were looking for their only homes to be swept away at any moment. It is very surprising what narrow escape some persons had staying in their little homes until they had to be rescued from the upper story windows by brave men in boats. The waters have subsided after having reached a point of 7.5 feet higher than the flood of 1877. The February 8th, 1890 edition of the News contained a long article about the progress at Berlin. This article gives us a glimpse of Berlin just prior to the announcement that the railroad was to move its main yard here. The village contained Jordan Crampton and Company, which was the mill, a bakery, William L. Gross's General Store on First Street, the post office being located in Gross's store, George B. Winter's large grocery and liquor store, a very popular restaurant and saloon operated by S.V. Blessing, a boarding house for laboring men operated by Turner and McBride, the Anderson Jackson Barber Shop, the W. Bernard Blacksmith Shop, Butcher Thomas Welt, and shoemaker Joseph Schilling. Also active in Berlin was the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Knights of the Pythias, and the Red Men. Also noted was the W. L. Gross was about to open an office for himself and a druggist, and William Hemp built a 2-story hotel for the men. Mr. Rice plans to build a confectionery store and ice cream parlor. There were 53 houses, and houses could be built between $300 and $600 and rented for $6 a month. And now the stage is set for the greatest folklore story of Brunswick history that combines the effect of the flood of 1889 and the success of the small village. So the story goes like this. A poor farmer comes to Berlin in 1889 and negotiates a very lucrative bargain for farmland along the banks of the flood-prone Potomac River. Then all of a sudden, agents for the B&O Railroad appear, and then surveyors show up. And the average Berliner had to wonder just what was the railroad up to. So by the 1880s, the B&O Railroad realized that their yards located in Martinsburg, West Virginia, were too small, and the location had no space to expand. The large flat farmland of Berlin was attractive to the B&O because of what? Location, location, location. Berlin was located near the fork that directed trains to Baltimore or Washington. It was also close to Harper's Ferry and the Weaverton to Hagerstown branch. In November 1889, the Frederick News stated that B&O surveyors were in town again, but their purpose was not known. Then just before Christmas in 1889, it was reported that the mystery surrounding the recent visits of the B&O officials to Berlin and obtaining options on some 400 acres of land in the vicinity has resulted as predicted. They will make that point a general freight distribution station. The citizens feel highly elated over the selection. The new year of 1890 rang in with much excitement and enthusiasm for Berlin, and oh, what a year it was. The best insight to the year of 1890 comes to us from the Frederick Daily News. In January 1890, the headlines read, "Berlin begins to boom. Price of land quadrupled in just a few months. The future of Berlin will be bright and flourishing." A bill was introduced in the Maryland legislature to build a bridge at Berlin across the Potomac. 75 men are now working, and that number will be increased daily. From February, the headlines read, "Berlin booms. 150 hands employed and progress on yards progresses. C.M. Winter has sold off his building lots. Citizens are keeping boarders and houses are filled at capacity. Now 200 laborers in Berlin, mostly Hungarians and Italians. Petition for incorporation started. Petition against incorporation started, citing increased taxation. The village burying ground is located on the northwest and has good drainage and is said to be one of the most sanitary graveyards in the state. The Able brothers, owners of the Baltimore Sun, offered to build Berlin a town hall, provided that the people there changed their name of the place to Able City. In March, a 2-horse team containing 4 Indians passed through Berlin recently. Were they on the warpath? March 6th, the bill was introduced to incorporate the town of Brunswick. Wait a second, time out. we have to talk about this Brunswick thing. Where did this Brunswick come from? So, as you know from previous episodes, Berlin went by a lot of different names. There was another Berlin on the Eastern Shore, and the postmaster's work was very difficult with two towns in the same state being named Berlin. So one of the solutions was to actually call this P.O. Barry, and that lasted for a number of years. We have examples of mails and letterhead and billheads that say, P.O. Barry, Berlin, Maryland. However, when the railroad made its decision to move the main yard here, the mail was going to increase, and so the confusion needed to stop. And the railroad was the one who proposed to name this town from Berlin to Brunswick. We have found no written records of whose idea it was, how it was proposed, how the town folks took it, took the news, or liked the name. We do know that Berlin, of course, comes from our German heritage, and Brunswick is German as well, and there is a Brunswick, Germany. So that is the story of how Brunswick, the name Brunswick, was selected for our town's name. A horrible headline in March stated that a young man that had so much potential was one of the men who saved a lot of residents during the Johnstown flood in Berlin, was killed. David Taylor was struck and killed in the New Berlin Yard. In April, B&O orders 365 houses for workers at Berlin. B&O increased wages for day conductors to $2.75 and night conductors to make $2.90 a day. April 8th, among local bills signed into law was to incorporate Brunswick, local election to take place later in the year. In June, the town has 2,000 inhabitants, making it the second largest town in the county outside of Frederick. C.W. Winter has now opened a lumber yard. In July, the large turntable has been placed, and telegraph works are now in place. 60 workers are employed in the yard. Mr. John L. Jordan of Jordan, Crampton and Company, which was the mill, withdrew from his company. He stated he has not decided his future intentions, but we now know what those intentions were. He was to run for the first mayor of Brunswick. In August, a meeting of citizens and voters of Brunswick was held, and a citizen's ticket was nominated for the election. The candidates on the ticket were John L. Jordan, mayor, Jonathan Ball, William Bernard, Walter P. Musgrove, and William L. Gross for council. On Tuesday, August 5th, 1890, Brunswick held its first election for mayor and city council. The polls were opened at noon and closed at 6:30. The voting population amounted to about 50. The candidates were John L. Jordan and Samuel Winter for mayor, and William Bernard, John Ball, William L. Gross, W.G. Musgrove, and Ben Sigafus for council. Out of 39 votes cast, Jordan received 32 for mayor. Sigafus narrowly beat Gross for council in what was viewed as an upset. The election judges were Christian Smith, L.T. House, Leander Barger. The occasion was made a holiday by all who could make it convenient to suspend their business. You may say, of a town of 2,000 inhabitants, why were there only 50 voters? To vote in the 1890 election, one had to be 21 years of age. You had to have lived in town 4 months prior to the election, which was prior to a lot of the boom that brought workers to the town. You had to be white, and you had to be male. In October, the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen reported 300 deaths nationwide during the year, 130 of them due to railroad couplers, and the rest being brakemen falling from moving cars. In December of 1890, we finished the year with Christmas. A local hotel had the following Christmas menu: roasted duck, roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, roasted beef, boiled ham, and mushrooms, sweet potatoes, mashed potatoes, baked beans, mince pie, apple pie, English plum pudding, nuts, fruit, eggnog, wines, and Madeira. Certainly, a look back on 1890 was toasted well by the end of the year. Well, folks, that was it, and we hope you enjoyed that segment of our Berlin turning into Brunswick and what happened during the year of 1890. My name is James Castle, president of the Brunswick Heritage Museum. We hope that you enjoy these episodes. If you do, and if you can, please donate to the museum through PayPal at admin@brunswickmuseum.org. Thank you very much. Our future episodes will be going now through the decades of 1890s, 1900s, 19 teens, and so on. See you soon.